Good morning, dear colleagues, excellencies, and distinguished representatives, and welcome to this sub-regional consultation for English-speaking countries of the Latin American and the Caribbean region. I just want to make clear now at the very beginning of this meeting that this meeting will be in English only, and it is open to everybody, of course, both from the English sub-region of the Latin American and the Caribbean region, but also to other interested countries. But just wanted to inform you that in 2 days, on the 23rd, at the very same hour, at 10 a.m. Panama time, there will be a very similar session in Spanish for those participants that would like to participate and to attend this meeting in Spanish. So just to clarify from the very beginning that this meeting will be in English only, and there will be a new meeting in 2 days on the 23rd, on Thursday, in Spanish only for those colleagues and participants interested in the sub-regional meeting in Spanish. So, good morning again, and thank you very much for having made the time to join this consultation today. This meeting is hosted and organized by the United Nations Environment Programme, and the topic of today's meeting is the implementation of an important resolution on mineral resource governance. As you may recall, this resolution was adopted back in March 2019 at the occasion of the 4th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly that was held in Nairobi at the UNEP headquarters. My name is Francesco Gaetani, and I'm the regional coordinator for the sub-program of UNEP Environment Under Review, which is essentially the sub-program focusing on data, information, assessment, and monitoring of environmental processes and change. I'm based in Panama at the regional office of UNEP for Latin America and the Caribbean. And today I will be facilitating this sub-regional consultation for these English-speaking countries of the region. As you may know, UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, is convening a series of virtual consultations at multiple scales, including the sub-regional, as it is the meeting today, the regional and the global scale. The consultations are being convened in all 6 UNEP regions from July to September of this year. In addition, there will be a global forum later in 2020, where all the regions will be brought together to be updated on the next steps, as we prepare for the 5th session of the Environment Assembly, or UNEA, which will be held in February 2021. Last Wednesday, 1 week ago, on July the 15th, we convened a first informative or briefing session held both in Spanish and in English to brief member states on the consultation process, and also to give them some details and some information regarding the implementation of this resolution. During that first meeting, we provided member countries with general information regarding the consultation process and the main steps towards the implementation of this resolution. During today's consultation, we hope to delve a bit deeper into the substantive aspects of this resolution and the foundational studies that have informed this resolution and the discussion paper which we have shared with you all. We will also be seeking your feedback on a number of questions related to the governance of minerals in your respective jurisdictions, in order to help us to better report back to the 5th United Nations Environmental Assembly in February 2021 in Nairobi. This consultation has been organized jointly by the United Nations Environment Programme through the Regional Office and the Division of Economy and Law, and thanks to the support and the cooperation of our technical partner, the University of Queensland, Australia, and notably the Sustainable Minerals Institute. We are also very much grateful for the generous support of the government of Switzerland, and in particular the Federal Office of Environment, to implement this resolution, and the government of Mexico, who is also participating in this meeting, who sponsored this resolution during the 4th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, or UNEA. Lastly, I would like to clarify that throughout this consultation, we will use the terms Environment Assembly, UNEA4, or UNEA, to refer to the UNEP's decision-making body on the environment. As I told you before, this resolution has been proposed to the 4th session of the UNEA and will be discussed and also considered for implementation at the forthcoming or upcoming next session of UNEA, UNEA 5, or 5th session of UNEA in February 2021. Okay, having said that, I would like to start this meeting and recalling what the government sponsor of this resolution have highlighted. Recalling the meeting that the adoption of this resolution is a quite important step for UNEP, because mineral resource governance lies at the heart of sustainable development. And this is even more important and critical for our region, Latin America and the Caribbean. At UNEP, we recognize that international cooperation is needed to improve and resolve governance issues in the extractive industries. And through the UNEA4 resolution, UNEP was requested to collect best practices and information about the challenges and difficulties related to minerals governance, and also to make an assessment about possible ways of how to best govern mineral resources and extraction. So what we would like to hear from you all today are your insights, your expertise, and your knowledge about difficulties, challenges, but also about best practices and success stories that you may have in your own country, so that UNEP can collect all this information and report back to the United Nations Environment Assembly in February 2021. Before I give the floor to the first speaker for today, allow me to provide you with an overview of this consultation and how this consultation is framed. Well, first we will hear from Mr. Leo Heilemann, the director of the Regional Office of UNEP for Latin America and the Caribbean, who will set the scene for our discussion today. Then we will hear from Professor Daniel Franks, who will present a more detailed briefing on the resolution. And this presentation will also cover technical details of the resolution, and specifically the operative paragraph that we are implementing through these regional consultations. Professor Franks will also take us through the upcoming consultation process, describing the events, the structure, and the feedback options that will form the process for getting us to the Global Forum and ultimately to the UNEA4. Following those words from our technical partner and from Professor Franks, we will then turn to three experts, global experts from this sector, who were also involved in the development of key foundational studies that have contributed to the development of the discussion paper that you got with our invitation. And these experts will highlight key issues around sand and sustainability, mine tailings, and mineral reserves governance in the 21st century. After these three quick interventions and presentation from technical experts, we will then open the floor for a question and answer session. And the chat function of this platform, the Cisco WebEx platform, is available to receive your questions throughout the whole consultation. So please state your question concisely and clearly, and we will try to address as many questions as possible during these 2 hours or probably more time of the meeting for today. After this question and answer session, we will then move to the discussion portion of this meeting, where we will be seeking your feedback and inputs on 3 pertinent questions that will be shared on the screen. I would like to end this very short overview, recalling you that this consultation is also being recorded, and all this, the material that we are collecting, we are producing throughout this consultation will be also made available through a specific platform whose URL will be shown to you more in another slide in a couple of minutes. So with this introduction, I'd like now to invite my director, or Mr. Leo Heilemann, the regional director and representative of the United Nations Environment Programme for Latin America and the Caribbean, to deliver the opening remarks. Mr. Heilemann, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Honorable representatives of the governments of the region, as well as the governments of Switzerland and Mexico, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the private sector and the UN colleagues. I would like to thank you very much for joining this briefing session and discussion on the implementation of the UN Environment or United Nations Environment Assembly Resolution 416 on mineral resource governance. I would like to thank the governments of Switzerland and Mexico for having pushed this resolution and co-sponsor this resolution, and also to the University of Queensland, Australia for its support, as well as all technical support that is being provided for this. This resolution recognizes the important contribution of mining towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and the dependence of low carbon clean technologies on metals and minerals. And this is a very important point because we are trying to drive towards low carbon, clean and sustainable development in technologies. And it is important to recognize that metals and minerals play a fundamental part in this. The resolution requests UNEP to collect information on sustainable practices, identify knowledge gaps and options for implementation strategies, and undertake an overview of existing assessments of different governance initiatives and approaches on sustainable management of metals and mineral resources. Mining has always been a fundamental sector and key sector for the economies of our region, attracting significant amount of foreign direct investments and constituting important export earnings for our countries. This sector has a demonstrated capacity to not only attract investments, but provides jobs and growth in wealth and economic development. In our region, in the Latin American Caribbean region, it attracts about 30% of world investment in this sector. It is a very strong contributor to the gross domestic product of many countries of our region. In Peru and Chile, it's up to and above 10%. In other countries, a little lower, 7%. In Brazil, in Mexico, over 4%. And in other countries, in the lower percentage ranges, Jamaica, 1.7%, more or less, Haiti, about 0.1%. Depending on the country and depending on the metals and the areas, it's of different levels of importance. Dominican Republic, it's a really important sector also. So clearly, it's a very important industry for our region, and it constitutes the broad-based requirements for the developments of our societies. Now, coming to these consultations, I think it's really important your contribution to this consultation, as it will not only assist us in implementing the resolution and integrating the outcomes into a report for submission to the next United Nations Environmental Assembly number 5, which will be held in Nairobi in February next year. But it also would then give us a reality check on what is happening and what is going on in terms of governance of the extractive industries in our region. And more specifically, we want to hear from you during the consultations that information that will guide us in the identification of best practices, knowledge gaps, and the assessment of existing governance options. We will look for your insights and guidance on a number of issues. For example, assessing what works and what doesn't work in the various overlapping initiatives and national policies aimed at improving the sustainable management of minerals and metals. To report back on current governance frameworks of key issues, including mine tailing, sand extraction, conflict minerals, and critical metals, and also evolving future metals that are important in terms of the industries related to telecommunication, cell phones, etc. To identify the knowledge gaps on good governance observed in different parts of key chains, and to explore how these gaps can be addressed given the knowledge implementation capacity and awareness differentials in different mining geographies in the region, and to explore the kinds of institutional and government frameworks that are best suited to support sustainable development with regards to the sustainable management of minerals and metals across the whole life cycle. The findings from the regional consultation, as was mentioned earlier, will feed into the report on the implementation of this resolution, which will be presented at the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly in February next year. And that will guide governments in terms of determining the future steps that should be taken by countries in this specific sector. We count on your support. We encourage you to actively contribute in the sharing of your insight and experiences, and indicate to you that this will be fundamental in the implementation of the resolution. I look forward to fruitful discussions during today's meeting and the sharing of information and direction and policy options and what works and what really does not work, so that they can be incorporated into the final report. I thank you very much for your participation and wish you success in these deliberations. Thank you. Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Heilemann, for your opening remarks that have perfectly set the scene and the expectations for this meeting. I'm now pleased to give the floor to Professor Daniel Franks to take us through the substantive content of the resolution and the roadmap to the UNEA4. Professor Franks, the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Daniel Franks and I'm a professor at the Sustainable Minerals Institute of the University of Queensland. I'm supporting the United Nations Environment Programme on the implementation of the United Nations Environment Assembly Resolution on Mineral Resource Governance. In this short presentation, I'll provide some background to the Mineral Resource Governance Resolution and overview of the consultations that we're conducting in the lead up to UNEA4 in 2021. At the fourth session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, held in Nairobi, Kenya, from the 11th to the 15th of March in 2019, the Assembly adopted a resolution on mineral resource governance. The resolution was sponsored by Mexico and co-sponsored by Switzerland. The operative text of the resolution requests that UNEP collect information on sustainable practices, identify knowledge gaps and options for implementation strategies, and undertake an overview of existing assessments of different governance initiatives and approaches relating to the sustainable management of metal and mineral resources. Further, this information should be reported to the United Nations Environment Assembly at its fifth session. The resolution reflects the growing prominence of mineral resource governance as a topic of international cooperation and builds on a number of foundational studies conducted by UNEP. The first is the International Resource Panel report, Mineral Resource Governance in the 21st Century, Gearing Extractive Industries Towards Sustainable Development. This report was released as a summary for policymakers in 2019, with a full report published in 2020. The second is the 2019 UNEP Grid Geneva report, Sand and Sustainability, Finding New Solutions for Environmental Governance of Global Sand Resources. The final group of reports are the 2017 UNEP Grid R&R report, Mine Tailings Storage, Safety is No Accident, and the follow-up 2018 report, A Roadmap for Improved Mine Waste Management. UNEP's work on tailings recently culminated in the adoption of the Global Industry Tailings Management Standard, which itself was the result of a global tailings review co-convened by UNEP, the Principles on Responsible Investment, and the International Council on Mining and Metals. In support of the resolution, we have prepared a discussion paper that summarises global trends in minerals and sustainable development. It presents key findings from the aforementioned foundational studies and presents a range of options for the governance of minerals and lessons from best practices. Questions are posed for consideration during the consultations and for future action on the topic. Consultative meetings on the resolution are being held from July through September of 2020. These virtual consultations will be held in all parts of the globe, with more than 20 meetings in total. The formats include briefings for member state governments, as well as sub-regional, regional, and global multi-stakeholder consultations. The consultations aim to obtain feedback on the governance of the extractive industries, understand the political landscape as well as regional needs. More specifically, and requested by the UNEA4 resolution, the consultations will also help identify best practices and knowledge gaps, assess governance options, and consider common elements of interest for next steps. We are inviting written submissions on the consultation questions outlined in the discussion paper. A survey link is available to submit feedback, or please send submissions to our email address. We are encouraging the public to submit short videos, and we have developed a podcast series, the Mineral Governance Podcast, where I speak with special guests about the big issues facing minerals and sustainability. Findings from the regional consultations will feed into the report on the implementation on the resolution, which will be presented to the UNEA at its fifth session in February 2021. While the discussion paper outlines a wide range of questions that we are interested in hearing your views on, the key consultation questions that will guide the consultation meetings are: what are the most pressing mineral resource governance challenges in your region, and what initiatives and approaches would help to address these challenges? What good or best practice examples can inspire sustainable or responsible development in the extraction, use and management of minerals? Specifically, are there any related to mine tailings and sand extraction? And based on the mineral resource governance challenges and gaps in your region, what themes and issues should be the focus of future action, including by international or UN bodies, on mineral resource governance? We'd like to encourage you to make your voice heard as part of this process by making a submission. We have a dedicated webpage on the Green Growth Knowledge platform where you can find out more and get involved. And finally, thanks for your time. We look forward to learning more as we move through this process.
Very good. Thank you, Professor Franks. Well, of course, this was a video, but I just want to inform you that Professor Franks is actually following this session and joined us for this session, although for him it's almost 2 a.m. in Australia. And Professor Franks will be taking questions on your presentation immediately following the expert presentations that I'm going to introduce now, because next I will then invite Pascal Peduzzi, a colleague from the UNEP's Collaborating Center GRID Geneva, or notably University of Geneva. And Pascal Peduzzi will present a short video and presentation on the sand and sustainability study.
Hello, my name is Pascal Peduzzi. I'm the director of GRID Geneva, which is a center for analytics for the United Nations Environment Programme. Today we're going to talk about sand. When we think about sand, we are usually thinking about beautiful beaches. That's what we think we're doing with sand most of the time. But in fact, our relationship with sand is more like this. We're mixing that with water, cement and gravels, and making concrete. And with concrete, we are building roads, buildings, dams. We even use that for glasses, be it for windows or for glasses. We are using that for computer chips. In fact, our entire development and entire societies are built on sand. But sand is produced very slowly at the geological scale. For example, all the rivers and glaciers of the world, every year they're shifting about 24 billion tons of this material. But we humans are using it twice as much. How do we know how much we're using of this material? It's very difficult because in fact there is no global monitoring. But what we know is the amount of cement that we're using. We're using 4.1 billion tons of cement per year, and this has been recorded. And the vast majority of that is being used in China. The relationship with cement and sand is quite one-to-one. It's not that this is not the recipe for making concrete, but we use sand for many other things than just making concrete. So if you look at this graph from the use of sand versus cement in the United States, we see that there is nearly one correlation of sand of use with cement. And in fact, it's about 10-to-1. So for every single tons of cement, we're using 10 tons of sand. Meaning that if we extrapolate that on top of land reclamation that we're using, for example, it's not only for building purpose, but we also use that for making artificial islands. For example, in Dubai, this is an image in 2001, and this is the same place in 2011. One of these artificial island structures used 1.2 billion tons of sand. Singapore is also using a vast amount of sand for increasing its territory. Since 1973, they increased the territory by 23.2%, using sand from Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia, and then as far as Myanmar in Vietnam. So if you get this amount of sand, we come to something like 50 billion tons of sand per year. Now, this amount is really big. So it is enough for building a wall of 27 meters high by 27 meters wide all around planet Earth every single year. So where is it coming from? We can take it from quarries on the land. So this has an impact because we need to clear the vegetation, then we dig a hole. It has an obvious impact on the landscape. But actually in this location, when it's done on quarries, sand is not a dynamic part of the ecosystem. It's like a deposit. So it doesn't harm that much the environment as as bad as it look. We can actually fill the gap afterwards with inert waste and then put some earth on top of that and replant vegetation or use that as agricultural land. However, this is something that will be a development over 50, 60 years. Now, there are other places where we're taking sand is a big, more problematic. For example, this is me in Tunisia. People have been taking sand that up to my shoulder height, lowering the ground that much. And that is placing those people more vulnerable to storm surge and sea level rise, making these land more susceptible to be infiltrated by salty water that can affect the aquifer. People are also taking sand from rivers, and when you do that, you are actually making the rivers, the shape of the river, deeper, and you may have impact on the erosion of the river banks, and it can lead to further flood downstream or drought upstream. And there's several other impacts on fauna and flora because you're changing the turbidity and changing the ecosystem. You can take it from the beaches. Again, this is where sand is playing a dynamic part of it, like in rivers. Sand on the beaches are actually protecting our shoreline against storm surge, against sea level rise, and against the infiltration of salty water. It also preempts any touristic development in the future if you remove all this sand from the beach. And obviously, it's destroying the habitat of this beach where turtles are nesting and birds are feeding themselves. Imagine this beach, after just one day of operation, it's gone. And then they go to the next beach and extending the process and impact further. Sand is also taking from the marine environment. These giant boats, it looks like a huge vacuum cleaner. And that's what actually they do. They are vacuum cleaning the bottom of the sea by taking all the sand, crunching all the microorganisms that are living there. And those microorganisms are the ones that are feeding the fishes that are then feeding bigger fishes and so on. And when this boat is taking the sand, they are rejecting particles that are too fine, creating this plume that we see. Changing the turbidity of the water. This operation at the bottom and the release of this plume has impact on biodiversity and on fishery. But also, when you're removing sand offshore, you're creating a gap, and that gap will be filled by sand that can behave a bit like a liquid by gently flowing in the direction of this gap to slowly fill this gap, creating beach erosion. And this is happening in many different places, not only because of the fact that we're taking sand away, but also because of sea level rise and intensification of waves and other destruction of the coastal ecosystem. But by taking sand away, we are accelerating this process. So why don't we use the sand from the deserts? Well, the wind erosion produces sand that is very round and very fine, and it does not apply as the same as the sand that you can get from glacier or wave erosion. It doesn't stick very well. It's not edgy enough, so not very fit for construction, and even less so for land reclamation. Also, it takes deserts are by definition not places that are inhabited. So if you need to transport this sand from the desert to where you need it, it will be extremely costly. So the trend is of use of sand is accelerated by the fact that we are living in the urban and urbanization. So people are now moving from villages into the cities, requesting new infrastructures for housing, for infrastructures for school, for healthcare, for airport, from dikes and bridges. So those infrastructures are heavily depending on the building material, obviously. And also we have a population dynamic. The world population will stabilize between 9.5 or 11 billion in 2050, but by then African population will double, and by doubling we mean another 1.27 billion people on top of the existing African population. So this associated with migration from rural to urban area, and as well as catching back on the infrastructures that they need for their development, mean that there is a huge pressure on sand and building material. So, is it time for panicking? No, it's time to look at solutions. And that's what we did. We asked experts about what we can do. And in terms of reducing our footprint on sand resources and how we can reduce the impact on the environment. So basically, we have to rethink our consumption model. That's not only for sand, it's valid for all the type of resources that we're using. But basically, we can reduce our demand for sand by making sure that the projects are well thought, and it's really something that we need. We can also reuse the building or retrofit them instead of knocking them down. Now, if we need to destroy them and rebuild, then we can recycle the concrete and part of that material can be then reused for rebuilding. And we can also retrieve material in our dam site. And in fact, in our waste, we can use the bottom ash from the waste to make a substitute for sand. We can also improve the way we're extracting sand by making environmental impact assessment prior to extract the sand and making sure that we have the environment, making it as clean as it is or even better after the operation. So preserving the biodiversity and making it in a nice way. So what are the next steps? Well, we circulated this report through all the member states, and they recognized the finding of our report and they adopted the resolutions for sustainable sand management. And now this is what we're going to do, is to collect information on sustainable practices, identify the knowledge gap, present existing solutions and best practices. And this is the way that we will inform member states about how to better improve their relationship with sand and making it more sustainable.
Hello, my name is Elaine.
Okay, very good. So we have heard from University of Geneva Grid Center of UNEP, and we had a quite peculiar and I would say different perspective regarding minerals, and this focus on sand. I think it's quite important, quite interesting also for our region, especially for small islands or for those Caribbean countries with large rivers, for instance, where extraction of sand is quite an important activity and economic sector. I'm now pleased to give the floor to another grid collaborating center of UNEP. In this case, I'm very glad to give the floor to Ms. Elaine Baker, who is from the Grid Arendal Center in Norway. And she will provide us a few words regarding mine tailings, which is another important issue related to minerals governance. Please.
Hello, my name is Elaine Baker. I'm a geoscientist at the University of Sydney, and I work with Grid Arendal, an official collaborating centre of the United Nations Environment Programme. We've been working with UNEP for the last 4 years, looking at the way the world deals with mine waste. Mining is essential for sustainable development, but the benefits of mining shouldn't come at the expense of lives, livelihoods, and the environment, which unfortunately is in many places around the world. It was very depressing to hear on the news last week that more than 170 people had been killed at a jade mine in Myanmar. It appears that heavy rain caused unconsolidated sediment that had been deposited on a slope to fail, resulting in a massive landslide. The people working at the base of the slope were unable to escape the river of mud and were swept away. These workers looked for small pieces of jade that pile after the industrial mining has been through. Officially, jade mining in Myanmar is worth $1 billion or so a year, but some experts put the real figure at closer to $40 billion a year. It was another fatal mine waste accident in 2015 that prompted a number of NGOs to ask the United Nations Environment Programme to examine the management of mine waste. Together with international experts, we produced this rapid response assessment report titled Mine Tailings Storage, Safety is No Accident. The report documents the enormous human and environmental cost of tailings dams disasters and examines opportunities to improve safety and encourage innovation in dealing with mine waste. So what are mine tailings and how are they stored? Tailings are the waste left over after the economical fraction has been removed. Typically, they're stored behind large embankments that can reach hundreds of metres in height and are built progressively over the life of the mine, which may be many, many years. They're made out of the mine's waste rock and sediment. The most common methods of embankment construction are illustrated on this slide and are described as upstream, downstream, and centerline. This refers to the direction in which the embankment crest moves in relation to the base. Embankments can be built using one of these methods or a combination. The upstream method generally has the lowest initial cost and has historically been the most popular method for dam construction in areas with low seismic activity. You can see from this slide that the embankment rests on this lighter coloured material, which is actually the tailings. The number of dam failures associated with upstream dams has led to increased scrutiny of this method. Modern tailings dams can be huge. This is the Fort Knox gold mine in Alaska. It's a cross-valley dam constructed using the downstream method. At the end of the life of the mine, the facility is expected to cover almost 400 hectares and contain nearly 300 million tonnes of mine waste. The volume of tailings produced per tonne of ore is increasing because of declining ore grades. Basically, we've mined the most accessible high-grade ores. The total volume of tailings on the planet is currently unknown, as is the number of tailings dams. But the most recent calculations suggest that around 9 billion tonnes of tailings are produced each year. To put that in perspective, that's around 2.7 million Olympic swimming pools. When tailings dams fail, the consequences can be extreme. The disaster that prompted the Rapid Response Report occurred at the Samarco mine in Brazil in 2015. 19 people were killed, and the 33 million cubic metres of tailings that were released caused huge environmental and social damage. The red-stained mud from the iron ore mine destroyed houses, farmland, and damaged an extensive river system. This included 4 water dams that supplied drinking water to hundreds of thousands of people. The plume went all the way to the Atlantic coast, more than 640 kilometres. So what's in tailings? Well, it depends on the ore type and the processing methods. Tailings can range from relatively non-toxic sediments to highly toxic mixtures with high concentrations of heavy metals, radioactive substances, and processing chemicals. This bar graph shows an estimate of the amount of valuable metals contained in tailings released when a tailings dam collapsed in Spain in the late 1990s. Thousands of tonnes of valuable material. Processing efficiency has improved since then, so there may be lower concentrations of target metals in mine waste today. But at many mines, valuable non-target commodities are not extracted during processing and therefore remain in the waste. Because tailings are a source of metals, some are being remined, and there are plans to make this part of the broader rehabilitation process at abandoned and closed mines. However, unfortunately, there is currently little application and no market for most mine tailings. There are alternatives to storing wet tailings in dams. Tailings can be filtered to remove water and produce a stackable material. The method has the advantage of eliminating catastrophic dam failures and conserving water. There are some downsides, which include high costs and the potential for erosion or seepage from the stacked material. After looking at the governance and management of mine tailings and examining case studies of past failures, the authors of the Rapid Response Assessment made some recommendations. These included improving the management of tailings through implementation of best practice standards, increased transparency of operation, and the introduction of mechanisms to improve accountability. The report also called for the development of financial assurance for proper mine closure and the establishment of an insurance pool to protect people and the environment in the event of a catastrophic failure. Some of these initiatives already existed in operational standards, but due to lack of reporting and transparency, it's been difficult to assess the quality of the implementation of these standards. And of course, tailings dams continue to fail. It's hoped that the recently completed Global Industry Standard on Tailings Management will address this and will also provide incentive for the industry to reach the goal of zero tailings facility failures.
Very good. Again, this is, I think, a quite important aspect related to the discussion for today's meeting. And we are now coming to the last and third video of expert intervention for today. And let us start now to hear remarks from Mr. Antonio Pedro of the International Resource Panel, or IRP.
As we have indicated in our IRP report, Mineral Resources Governance in the 21st Century, there's a growing recognition that if well managed, the extractive sector can play a positive role in promoting broad-based development and structured transformation of many resource-rich countries. This includes an important contribution to the implementation of all the SDGs. Nevertheless, poor management and bad governance can lead to resource-driven conflicts, security of supply crisis, violation of human rights, severe environmental impacts, social disruptions, economic instability, poverty, rent capture and tax evasion, which will contribute to reversing any potential development gains. It has long, therefore, been recognized that governance is key for mitigating these adverse impacts and enhancing the positive economic, social, and environmental outcomes of mining. There is already a plethora of domestic, regional, international, legal and regulatory frameworks, initiatives and instruments, including at company level, all aimed at better governing the extractive industry for increased economic prosperity and environmental protection. The IRP report on mineral resource governance mapped and evaluated almost 90 international initiatives pertaining to the extractive sector. It identified many commendable initiatives such as the African Mining Vision, the ITI, the Global Reporting Initiative, the Natural Resources Charter, and the wider work of the International Council on Mining and Metals, to name a few. However, on the whole, our report concludes that most of the existing policy frameworks and instruments governing the mining sector represent piecemeal efforts and, importantly, often fail to be implemented at the national level. A transition away from the enclave nature of the extractive industry prevalent in the developing world and ensure the implementation of these SDGs requires, therefore, a new holistic global governance framework. Our IRP report refers to this as Sustained Development License to Operate, or SDLO. The SDLO recognizes planetary boundaries, promotes the circular economy, embraces life cycle and landscape planning approaches, measures success on the basis of a quadruple bottom line approach, covers the entire mineral value chain, and facilitates shared value creation and a fair distribution of benefits. Such a multi-level, holistic, and integrated framework is applicable to governments, companies, shareholders, institutional investors, labor, local communities and indigenous people, civil society, consumers, and a broader range of other stakeholders in the extractive industry. The SDLO framework seeks to create a governance landscape by advocating for cross-stakeholder coordination of goals, upward harmonization of global standards and metrics, concerted consolidation of existing instruments, as well as by pointing to areas where new instruments might be needed and how a particular instrument will interact with others through greater interoperability. At the international level, the IRP report also discusses the creation of an international minerals agency or the signing of an international agreement to, inter alia, coordinate and share data on economic geology, mineral demand needs, and promote transparency on impacts and benefits. In line with the SDLO, our other recommendations for practical near-term actions to improve global mineral governance include the following: a global platform for continued dialogue and advocacy on cross-cutting issues illuminated by the SDLO, regional platforms to engage host and home regions on issues of sustained development and security of supply, reconciled through commitments such as the African Mining Vision, national level voluntary definition of parts to the SDLO. We also recommend that we should build on selected initiatives, such as the 94 Equator Principles Financial Institutions, or the EPFIs, to build and harmonize a global standard of good practice anchored on the SDLO. Perhaps also a consideration on creating an extractive chapter on the Global Pact for the Environment. We also believe the country mining visions can be a platform to determine the paths for the SDLO through continued dialogue and advocacy on cross-cutting issues. So overall, we are very pleased that the IIRP report on mineral resources governance in the 21st century informed Member States' decision at the fourth session of the UN Environment Assembly, UNEA4, to adopt a resolution on mineral resources governance. We look forward to the deliberations of UNEA5.
Very well. So with this last presentation, we concluded included these three quite different angles and perspectives related to the mineral resource governance, including sand, including tailing, which means a more technical aspect of mineral governance, and lastly, a more broader presentation related to the implementation at national and global level of standards and regulations for the sector. We would like now to open the floor for any remarks or questions on this presentation, and also on the initial presentation that Professor Franks provided before these three presentations provided by experts. We invite you to post your questions in the chat box, and we will take as many questions as possible within the next 10 minutes before moving to the next session. Professor Franks is also available to of course, to respond to your question, and possibly I really would like to ask now Professor Franks if he would like to introduce or to add something to the concept he brought us through the video.
Thank you, Francesco. I guess to begin with, I'd just like to reiterate how important it is to invite your input into this UNEA consultation process. We understand that because of the circumstances around COVID-19 and needing to move to a virtual consultation format, our opportunities for engaging with all member states and all stakeholders are more restricted in an online virtual format. So please do take opportunity to send us written submissions and to fill out the survey that we have issued. Also, we're putting together video interventions from stakeholders around the world on different topics. So we would invite you to make a personal video intervention or one on behalf of your institution to address any issue of importance around mineral resource governance, and we'll be sharing those at upcoming consultations and in other media. I'm happy that this evening or this morning for your time to answer any technical questions related to these presentations. Some of the earlier questions that we have received have related to mine tailings and the introduction of the new global tailings standard, global industry tailings management standard. This standard is a new a new standard that applies at the global level to the mining industry. It is not something that has been taken up yet by member states, but it has been agreed to by its principal co-conveners and will be released publicly soon. So that a global tailings review was formed by the United Nations Environment Programme, the International Council on Mining Metals, and the Principles on Responsible Investment. And that review led to this new standard that has been adopted and will be implemented by all ICMM member companies and will be made public soon. Even though the standard is yet to be made public and put into practice, it is envisaged that an independent organisation would then certify individual mining companies to that standard. I'm happy to now pass back to Francesco for any further questions.
Okay, very good. Just wanted oh, sorry. Very good. I just wanted to add also that if you wish to ask your question, speaking, not in written form, you can do that. You just have to open your microphone and to possibly raise your hand. Okay, there is a first question here from Cornelio Delgado. And this is about sand and tailings management. Okay, I'm reading it. There is a pilot project focused on disposing mining granulated tailings after chemical and physical stabilization to nurture rivers and by natural flow to nurture beaches. What is your view about this model and the business case associated? Many thanks. Professor Franks.
Thank you, Cornelia. That's an excellent question. It's long been thought that mine tailings could pose some possibilities for reuse under certain specific circumstances. I'm not aware of the specific example that you've raised, but there are many such examples of the use of benign mine tailings material as construction material or in land reclamation. So in some ways, what we're talking about is solving one of our environmental problems that has been presented in these technical papers, technical presentations, which is the potential catastrophic failure of tailings facilities by solving another problem, and that is the overuse of sand from natural ecosystems. So using benign tailings to reduce our use or reliance on sand extracted from the natural environment. There are obviously some challenges and important considerations that need to be met to make that a successful solution to both of these problems. The most important being that the material that is being reused of the tailings is in fact benign. The way that tailings are produced and the geological source material of most mine tailings is such that they can contain quite a large array of different elements that can pose problems in the environment. This is not always the case with tailings, but it is possible. Also, tailings often contain sulfide materials that when they break down produce acid and metalliferous drainage. So we want to be certain that the material that is being reused of tailings is in fact benign over very long periods of time. Some tailings can be reprocessed to remove such elements. Other tailings may not have those elements in them to begin with. So as long as that criteria is met and the tailings itself meets the technical standards that new use requires, then I think it's a really good potential solution to a number of these crises to look at how tailings can be reused. The biggest challenge is an economic one. Most construction materials are very bulk commodities, so need to be produced near to the location in which they are used, usually within 100 kilometers. So finding markets for tailings very close to where they're produced is critically important. But in general, I think that this should be looked into more. There are some regulatory barriers in a lot of countries. The legislation does not permit the reuse of these industrial waste materials. So there's a long way to go to make that a solution that is effective, but is certainly one that we are looking into at the Sustainable Minerals Institute, and I know that Grid Geneva are also looking into for its potential.
Yeah,
Back
there
to
is
you,
another.
Francesco.
Thank you, Daniel. There is another interesting comment from Jamaica, and the point here is that, and I think this is not an issue for Jamaica only, is something that, based on my very, very limited experience, is something that is quite common in the region. The fact that in the case of tailing management structures, these structures are dating back 50 to 60 years ago. So the design parameters are not up to date, and there is, of course, an obsolescence and in general a quite evident, change in the performance of this structure over the years. So the comment, the question here is quite important, quite interesting, is related to the effects of climate change on these constructions and structures, and the ability to adapt the structures to modern parameters or standards. So the question is, how can approaches be developed for this?
Thank you, Francesco. I think this is a really important question, and in fact, a question that isn't really addressed by the global industry tailings management standard. That standard applies to facilities that are currently operational, but there is a very large number of facilities that have been decommissioned and that are still present within the landscape. The challenge is that tailings facilities require long-term, even perpetual management. So either the old facilities or the facilities that have been decommissioned or abandoned, those facilities require some process for rehabilitation and removal as a structure in the landscape. And the global tailings industry tailings management standard does not address that issue in great detail. I think it's one that member states need to consider about the possible options for investing in that process of removal, or if those dams are still operational, the process of upgrading the actual facility design to meet modern standards. So the climate change presents a pretty significant challenge. What we saw earlier last year was that the Church of England and the Swedish Council on Ethics asked 700 mining and oil and gas companies to disclose information on their tailings storage facilities in the largest ever survey of its kind. And one of the questions was asked about climate change and whether tailings facilities, their tailings facilities had taken into consideration the changed climatic circumstances. And we saw that a very large number of facilities have not undertaken that analysis. So it is a very important and acute issue. More than just the climate change issue, we also see that the consequences of facility failure over time are also increasing as communities and towns are built around facilities that, when they were originally commissioned and designed, did not have those communities around them. So the structure, the design characteristics of a tailings structure are often a function of the degree of consequence that would happen if that structure failed. And when a structure is built when communities are not around it, it may not have the same design characteristics as later when those communities do pop up around them, as would be needed to account for that consequence. So it's not just climate change, it's also the fact that population is growing and people are starting to live near those facilities. And what we do need is we need governments to get involved in assessing the risks of facilities and deciding what to do about those facilities that have elevated risk of failure.
Thank you, Professor Franks. And I fully agree that this is a quite important matter, and especially for the Caribbean. And frequency and amount of rains, for instance, it's changing, and of course this is posing new challenges for these structures, and also the built up area is now distributed in a completely different way. And this should also be considered in this vulnerability and exposure to these structures. We have now a question from our colleagues from the Economic Commission from Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, that will also provide a presentation in a couple of minutes. And the question is about the implementation of the SDLO in Australia, and how this worked out, and also the possibility of introduction of this initiative and the devaluation of this of the implementation of this initiative in Australia. If you can provide us with a very short overview on this.
Thanks, Francesco. So the social license to operate concept is a concept that is an industry term. It's come out of the mining industry. And the social license to operate is a metaphor that refers to the fact that for a successful mining operation, it's not only necessary for there to be a legal license from government, but there be a social license or form of social acceptance from the communities and other stakeholders that live around mining operations and also exist at broader geographies. So that term social license to operate has been around for since the 90s, and it is in wide use within the mining industry. What has happened recently is the International Resources Panel, in their report that was released earlier this year, has proposed that the social license to operate as a concept is inadequate to describe the full range of issues that are necessary to consider when a mining project is implemented. They have proposed instead the term social development, sustainable development license to operate. This is not a concept that has been implemented in Australia to date, or I believe anywhere in a kind of more tangible form. It's a proposal from the International Resources Panel that we consider a framework of sustainable development license to operate in the governance of natural resources. And one of the questions we'd like to get out of this consultation process is whether member states feel that terminology is an effective term, a useful term. So we would encourage all stakeholders to read the International Resources Panel report or read the summary of that report in the discussion paper that we've prepared and give us feedback on the utility of the Sustainable Development License to Operate concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Franks. I think we can now move on to the next session, which is the plenary session of this meeting. And before we move to the next session, as I mentioned before, I just wanted to remind the meeting, the participants, that you can ask for the floor if you wish. You can ask your question speaking directly to Professor Franks. And also, as you may be aware, because this is also reported in the informative or information note you got with the invitation, you can also send your questions or your comments, your feedback through written submissions of no more than 5 pages, as stated in the informative note, to email address that is unea.mrg@ggkp.org, which is quite a complicated one, but you can read it now from the chat box. And the deadline for submission has been set to the 28th of August. So you have more than 1 month to send these written submissions to UNEP and to our technical partners for inclusion in the sub-regional consultations material. I also recall you that all the material, background publications, the assessments that were mentioned in several videos, the recording of these meetings, and really all the material, all the background publications that are relevant to this consultation are available or will be soon available in the web page of the Green Grove Knowledge platform. And also a survey. I remind you that a survey has also been issued with the link available in the information pack you have received to join this call. Okay, I'm now pleased to move us to the next portion of our meeting for today, of our program. Essentially, we have for this plenary session 3 key questions that we would like to pose to you during this session. The questions are now or will be now shared on the screen. I cannot see the screen, but I think so. And the questions are as follows. Well, firstly, we really would like to hear from you what are the most pressing mineral resource governance challenges in your jurisdiction or region. What are the governance initiatives and the approaches which help address these challenges? So the first question is on challenges. Secondly, what good or best practice examples can inspire sustainable or responsible development in the extraction, use and management of minerals? And also whether if they any related to maintaining facilities and sand extraction, which, if you remember, were the 2 technical inputs we got a few minutes ago from our legal partners. And thirdly, based on mineral resource governance challenges and gaps in your region or in your country, what themes and what issues should be focus of future action, including by international or UN bodies, on mineral resource governance? So you can see now the questions on the screen. And before opening the floor for this plenary session and hearing from you and hearing your inputs and feedback on these 3 questions, allow me now to open this plenary session by giving the floor to Ms. Janet Sanchez, who is the Director of Natural Resources Division of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean of ECLAC. And Ms. Sanchez will provide us with a short presentation on the economic and social importance of mineral resources for the region, including some interesting reflections and analysis around the three main questions that I just provided you, that you can also see on your screen. And the idea for this presentation is really to consider these three key questions as the drivers for today's discussion. So, having said that, Ms. Sanchez, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francesco, and good morning to you, everyone. I would like to thank you to UNEA4 for the invitation, and I am going to share with you the presentation. Let me see. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you see? Can you see it?
Yes, yes. Please go ahead. Very good.
Okay. So I will talk about the challenges of mineral resources governance in Latin America and the Caribbean. And well, we have many challenges, and let's start saying that we have important mineral reserves and production with weak local economic linkages and growing social environmental conflicts in exploration as well as in exploitation due to impacts on other natural resources such as water and biodiversity. As we can see in the figures, the main minerals in which we have a big share of world mineral reserves and also production are lithium, copper, silver, molybdenum, lithium, zinc, iron, etc. We have also other important challenge, which is the large presence of artisanal and small-scale mining production, in many cases informal and illegal, with social and environmental impacts. Well, the problems that we are confronting is low technology, tax evasion, increases risks of conflicts with indigenous and local communities, and also with formalized miners. We have also illegal activities, lack of control, and it's important to distinguish among formal and formalizable small-scale and artisanal mining and illegal mining. Another important challenge is the volatility. In the fiscal dimension is the volatility, low fiscal progressivity, redistributive conflicts among the central government and mining companies, among local governments and communities, and insufficient investing in lasting capital with income from non-renewable and to natural capital. We have some instruments, but there is weaknesses in the investment of the mining tax revenues. We do have sovereign wealth funds in some countries, but more emphasis has been placed on stabilization and saving functions than on investing in lasting capital and structural change. There is also lack of planning and investment capacities, particularly in local governments. Finally, we have issues about corruption and lack of transparency and accountability. Another important challenge is that we have growing domestic extraction and net mineral exports in monetary and fiscal terms that contribute to primary export specialization at the bottom of the global value chain and increase pressure on the environment. We can see the figures about that at the right. We see the balance of materials, and we have increasing deficit. The increase in social metabolism, material and energy flows in the region causes greater socio-environmental conflicts, including those of the distribution of costs and benefits in mine closure and post-closure, as you can see before in the management of tailings. We have countries with important conflicts, mainly Mexico, Chile, Peru, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Guatemala, Bolivia, Ecuador. We have also some challenges in mine closure and post-closure. And for instance, we need to prevent the emergence of new environmental liabilities. We have to deal with or regulate according to the principle of polluter pays. And finally, we need to have financial guarantees and post-closure funds, and there are few countries in which this is going on. The governance of a mineral resource is conditioned in the short and medium term by the conflicts in the context of COVID-19, and in the long term by the energy transition and electromobility that will expand the demand for the various minerals and expand the extractive frontier. Conflicts over the guarantee of health of workers and communities, especially of the indigenous people in the context of the COVID-19 MRG, and in the recovery also, conflicts over the strengthening of infrastructure and sanitary facilities in mining communities, conflicts over mining taxation and deregulation, and the issue of race to the bottom, and finally conflicts over the role of mining for economic reactivation. And we know that the requirements of mineral to achieve a sustainable energy transition will require important amounts of minerals. By 2050, we have those requirement rates that are very, very high, as we can see, in cobalt, graphite, lithium, indium, etc. There are also good practices in the region, but it's necessary to deep, transparent, democratic, and effective multi-level governance throughout the life cycle of mining for a sustainable development. As a colleague before referred, at the international level, we have the AT, and Colombia, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Peru, and Trinidad and Tobago are in this initiative. In several countries, there are other guidelines and standards for mining, but the problem is their diversity, heterogeneity, and the fact that their dependency on the goodwill of companies. At the regional level, we have the Escazú agreement, which, ICLAC was an important advocator. Through this agreement, we have promote access to information, public participation, and justice in environmental matters. 22 countries signed it, and 9 of them ratified it, and just only 2 more ratifications are missing for this to enter into force. Finally, good national practice for mining governments and policy in the Andean countries at various stages of the project life cycle are the following. For instance, mechanisms for citizen participation, community popular consultations and prior consultations, for instance, in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, social innovation and shared value with communities and access to information, which is new and is occurring in the lithium exploitation areas in Chile, map of mining royalties in Colombia, for instance, policies and strategies of innovation and productive linkages, which occurs in the value change of lithium, copper, and solar energy in the case of Chile. The stabilization fund in Peru, which has helped finance spending during the current pandemic. Distribution of mining royalties at the national level, in the case of Peru, creation of a public company for investment of revenues from mineral rents, for instance, in the case of Ecuador. We have also advanced royalties in mining contracts in the case of Ecuador. We have interesting public companies in Chile, such as Codelco, that has a good practice in corporate governance and mineral rents appropriation. And we have also ENAMI, a public company in Chile that have good practices in promoting small mining. And finally, regulatory and institutional framework for mine closure in the cases of Chile and Peru. Concluding, there are, as we have seen, there are significant reserves and growing socio-environmental conflicts in exploration and exploitation in both large-scale and small and artisanal mining. Important mining production with weak economic and productive linkages and fiscal progressivity with redistributed conflicts of capture and allocation of the mineral rents among the central government, companies, local governments, and communities. Natural resources dependence, primary export specialization, low value added, and insufficient investing of revenues coming from non-renewable natural capital to develop into lasting capital. Also, we have growing domestic extraction and net mineral exports are putting pressure on the environment and increasing socio-environment conflicts, including those on the distribution and mine closure and post-closure costs. Mineral resource governance is conditioned in the short and medium term by the context of the COVID-19, and in the long term by the energy transition. Finally, the region has demonstrated good practices in several areas, but requires deepening transparent, democratic, and effective multi-level governance throughout the life cycle of mining within the framework of sustainable development. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sanchez from the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and notably the director of the Division of Natural Resources. We do know the importance of the economic commissions in general for guiding and informing the governments of the regions regarding regulations, governance structures, and legal instruments, especially for this very important topic and sector as minerals. We are now coming to the last part of this meeting for today, and we really would like to hear from you. And this is your opportunity to ask questions and to ask for the floor. If you wish, you can write down your questions in or your comments as well in the chat box, or either, if you prefer, you can raise your hand, well, using the WebEx, and ask for the floor. As usual, since this is a stakeholder consultation, which is open to governments and other stakeholders, as usual, we would like to provide this opportunity to intervene and to make comments to the government first, and then to other organizations, stakeholders, and everyone is participating in this first sub-regional meeting. Okay, I see there is one question from Miss Shanti Persaud from Jamaica, and from the Bauxite Institute, I think, of Jamaica. So I really would like to give the floor to Miss Persaud, and please, if you can also before making your question, say your name and your role, and to which institution, organization you are pertaining. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesco. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, I was just trying to answer question 1. And part of our challenges is that we have quite an old governance framework for mining and minerals, and this is in need of updating, I think, in terms of structure. Also, we have quite a bit of environmental regulation right now, which is possibly an impediment for the minerals industry. And finally, our biggest challenge, I think, is from increasing advocacy from the environmental NGOs. And it has turned into quite a strong anti-mining lobby, because we are also quite well positioned to be important in terms of biodiversity and forest protections. What we have done in Jamaica to try and face these challenges is that recently we have done a mining policy framework assessment, and there is ongoing review of the environmental regulations to make them as useful as possible, I think, and as sensible, not over-regulate. In terms of addressing the concerns of the environmental NGOs, they do have a strong role in the environmental impact assessment process. But I think in terms of a government, because we're coming out of a more old structure, it's hard for us to be as up to date in terms of social media and, you know, campaigns and so on. So that's something that we do need to work on.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your intervention. I'm monitoring here to see whether there are other questions in reaction to the presentation we had today, both from Professor Franks, from LAC, and also the three presentations from experts focusing on three aspects of mineral governance. In any case, I recall you again that it is possible to send your comments and your inputs and feedback through written statements or written contributions up to 5 pages. And you already saw in the chat box the email address that you can use for this submission. And the deadline is the 28th of August 2020. Professor Franks, you want to add something on what we just heard from ECLAC, for instance, regarding the situation in the region?
No, but perhaps I'd add something on the intervention from Jamaican Bauxite Institute just now. So Jamaica is a very interesting country in terms of resource governance and also the mineral sector. In addition to bauxite, it has very large reserves of aggregates and particularly limestone-based aggregates, but also more broadly that are really important for the construction sector. They also export some of those aggregates to the United States, both in terms of use as a construction material, but also upgrading that limestone in particular for very high value for use. So one of the things that we think is important during this UNEA process is to consider not just the minerals industry that's typically defined as metals, but also the construction materials and industrial mineral sector, which is by far the largest part of the mineral sector globally, making something in the vicinity of 85% of global mineral production. And Jamaica is a good case in point where the construction materials sector is usually small and medium-sized enterprises, usually does not have the quite wide capabilities within the organizations that large-scale mining companies have to address environmental issues, but is still a really important player in this context. And Jamaica in particular is looking to move beyond the consideration of the mineral sector just as metals, and has, as part of the minerals policy, new minerals policy, is looking to expand even the Jamaica Bauxite Institute into a national minerals institute to consider the whole array of minerals that are important for the economy and for the environment. So it is perhaps an example of how a best practice example of how mineral resources can be conceived of differently by countries, and these construction materials and industrial minerals, sometimes called development minerals, can be brought into the national policy making settings because currently they're excluded in many countries. Thanks, Francesco.
Thank you, Professor Franks. Okay, we are now open to receive your questions or your comments, and just to comment very quickly here that of course Jamaica is a quite interesting case and a very important country for the Caribbean region. Although Jamaica is a relatively big country with a quite big population living within. And I think it would be also important and interesting to hear from possibly from other smaller countries of the Caribbean region, where of course, the pressures and the impacts of the mineral sector is probably more important. And perhaps we can ask, I don't know if other countries would like to intervene. Not really, it's not really, I mean, mandatory to answer the 3 questions. The questions were intended to drive a bit our discussion, but I think it would be quite interesting for everybody to hear from other countries. And also to try to build an overview and a comprehensive, perspective of this theme for the English-speaking countries of the region. Okay. Okay, I see. Sure. Absolutely. Cornelio, if you wish to make a comment, the floor is yours. And if you can also introduce yourself and just to know, I mean, your affiliation, your organization or institution. Please, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Francesco, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure being from Vancouver. I'm currently Director on Sustainability and Mining at Palladium. Palladium is a global impact firm working in 100 countries. And I'm working with a group on mining and sustainability. My main focus had been working across the Americas, especially Central and South America, in natural resources across different mining stages, including early development, construction, operations, and then closure. And in most of my experiences, I had been also dealing with issues like artisanal and small-scale miners. And I found very interesting cases on joining forces between small artisanal small miners with medium-size or large-scale companies to improve efficiencies into the system. Basically, my comment today is about a new challenge, or probably the pressure challenge that the sector is facing. And you could see trends globally on the decreasing in the metal ore grades on each mine across the Americas, even globally. It means that the concentration of minerals in the mine is being lower and lower all the time. It also means that the timing for extraction will be shorter. So now I'm seeing, for example, mining projects that are running for 8 years, 10 years, 15 years, and that's it. And then they will close. That short period of time, it's putting a lot of pressure in elements, as Janet Sanchez mentioned before, which is local planning, for example. If there is a community that is having a mine nearby with only 8 years of operation, the community and the local government will face a challenge that they need to plan for these 8 years and be ready for immediate closure, and then the impact after the closure, because the period of time to assimilate or develop a proactive program to add value to the community or to incorporate new skills, new businesses into the mining business will be absolutely short. So that is putting a lot of pressure, and I think local governments and local businesses needs to be ready for shorter periods of times of planning and basically taking advantage of this small period of time where the mining will be completed. It's being very rare, and it will be more rare in the future, these big deposits with 50 years, 70 years, or 100 years of operations. That will be really rare. It's being rare in Chile, in Peru. It's being rare in other countries across the Americas. And we need to be ready for a faster industry with new business models that basically are going to a region, extracting the material, and then leaving the area. That will generate for sure new challenges. And basically my call today is incorporating this new reality into the policies, into the action plans, into the local or municipal plans, and taking advantage of this new mode of the industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Cornelio. And this is a quite relevant point, especially for small island states and Caribbean English-speaking countries, because just mentioning to the logistics and the costs needed to start the activities and also only to move, the machineries to the islands. All these activities, they do have a lot of costs. And so here I think it's really important to consider the pressures and to possibly adopt standards or regulation to avoid that these activities will then be, conducted in a form that is not strictly regulated and subject to the control of the government, of other institutions. But yes, these different dynamics is posing a lot of challenges. I can see your point here. And I see Professor Franks also would like to comment on this point.
Thank you, Cornelia. That's a really important point that you're making about the challenges for local economic development that arise when mining projects are shorter in nature. It can take a significant amount of effort to build up the economic relationship between local businesses and mining projects. Already we see that even the long-term projects are best placed to take advantage of the upstream economic opportunities at the local scale. So particularly local content and service provision from local providers. And we already see less economic activities related to the downstream side of mineral projects. I think your point around shorter projects will exacerbate that issue. Perhaps an analogy that we can draw is that many gold mines already are short term. So we'll probably see many of the other commodities start having project timescales that maybe marry gold projects. I'm not sure, but a point that I would probably extend from what you were saying as well is there are quite a lot of local environmental issues that are also linked to that issue of declining ore grades. So with declining ore grades, to mine the same amount of material, to get the same amount of commodity, we need to mine more ore. When we mine more ore, we have greater inputs of water and greater inputs of energy, and we produce more tailings, right? So what we saw from a global tailings survey I mentioned earlier by the Church of England, that the amount of tailings material set to be produced in the next 5 years is 25% more than the current amount of tailings under storage, which is a huge amount. We also see that the technologies that are available to more safely store tailings material, those being the technologies around filtration, dewatering, and dry stacking, they are also technologies that can reduce water use, for example. So there's a lot of potential in the new innovations around tailings management. we haven't seen a large-scale uptake of filtration and dewatering. It's still only around 4 to 6% of new tailings facilities. If we're going to see a step change, we would want to see quite a significant degree of new innovation and uptake on dewatering that could address quite a number of different issues. The final point I'd like to make in the kind of 10 minutes we have left for this consultation is that I'd be really keen on hearing some case studies from the Caribbean around the role of construction materials in disaster reconstruction. It's an area that I've worked in myself a fair bit, and what we see often is that mineral commodities aren't really part of the planning process for disaster reconstruction. In the Pacific, where I live, we saw quite a number of examples of after cyclones there being a shortage of construction materials, and quite a few challenges around that shortage and not being able to rebuild roads and rebuild schools and bridges, etc., with local construction materials. So I'd be keen to hear from any Caribbean nations around what's the experience from the hurricanes that they've had in their regions, and whether there is something we can learn from the use of construction materials from those events. Back to you, Francesco, or for member states and other stakeholders to comment on.
Yes, thank you, Professor Franks. We still have 5 minutes to close this meeting. So this is a call for member states if they want to take the floor now and to ask questions or provide their standpoints or comments, or possibly they can submit their questions and comments and feedback through different channels that we already presented. But if you go to the chat box, you can see the different ways available for submitting your feedback and inputs. So there is a survey. There is the possibility to submit written submissions by August the 28th to the email unea.mrg@ggkp.org, and also possibly more effective. You can also submit your video submission if you wish. A very short video, no more than 2 minutes, even less if possible. And in this case, possibly it would be better to send the video through WeTransfer or other peer-to-peer protocols. Okay, I don't see any request for the floor. I suspect we are now approaching to the closing of this meeting, and I just want to thank you again for your participation in this meeting, and again express the gratitude of UNEP, the team, both in Panama City, in Nairobi, and in Paris, to Professor Daniel Franks and his team for their support and their inputs to the sub-regional consultation meeting. And with that, again, if you have any feedback or questions, as we hope you have, please use the 3 channels that are now on the chat box. And we very much look forward to welcoming you again to the larger regional consultation, which will be convened on the 18th of August 2020. So the 18th of August, in 1 month, little less, there will be a regional meeting, a regional consultation meeting, meaning English speaking and Spanish speaking and Portuguese speaking and French speaking countries of the region all together for a regional consultation meeting. In the regional consultation meeting on the 18th, there will be a translation service available. So no problem for those of you that do not speak Spanish. Then, of course, please don't forget to register for the sessions, for the regional session on the 18th. Possibly through the website that was mentioned at the show to you before, which is the Green Grove Knowledge Portal. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention. And also I thank you very much and especially and Ms. Jeanette Sanchez for her participation. And I wish you a good rest of the day or evening in the case of colleagues in Nairobi in Australia. And I look very much forward to meeting with you again on the 18th of August for the regional consultation. And we also look forward to receiving from you your inputs and feedback using the different channels that have been just presented. Thank you again and have a good day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.